As I mentioned at the beginning, I think this will likely be the last evening we'll spend looking at the slogans of the sixth point. And this is a little bit of an odd one in that there's so many different ways that our teachers translate even the slogan itself, not to mention the commentary. Starting with our friend there, Jamgon Control, The Great Path of Awakening, sort of the more or less the recent source book. He says, don't rely on a sense of duty. Interesting. And in the back, in the appendices, there are two different takes on a list of the slogans, and the other one, the other way it's put is, don't be so predictable. And either of those could leave you scratching your head. You know, what are they getting at here? What's the point about, I mean, shouldn't I have a sense of duty? Isn't that rather important? And isn't consistency something I might want to cultivate? And so this is going the other way here. And here's Jamgon Control's commentary, which also leaves me scratching my head a little bit. A person who has a sense of duty in his affairs doesn't forget the people who concern him, no matter where he is or how much time has gone by. When someone causes you trouble and has made you angry, you might never let go of that resentment. Stop it. Take a helpful attitude or action in response to someone who causes trouble. So there'll be a lot of different ways about talking about that. But where he goes with it is when adversity arises, take it as the path, right? Take a helpful attitude or action in response to someone who causes trouble. Still, you know, how that relates exactly to not relying on a sense of duty or being predictable is not at least entirely clear to me right off. Pema Chodron talks about that some, but I won't read that because I know you all do that. Most of you are looking at her book. But she also uses the translation, don't be so predictable. Now here's the blue book, Tralig Kyabgon, a highly esteemed Rinpoche. Translates this, don't rely on your good nature. And you say what? Isn't that what I should rely on? And he says this, the contradictions implicit in this difficult and enigmatic slogan are reflected in the varying interpretations found in different Lojong commentaries, as I've also mentioned. And he talks about the Tibetan translation and the English translation, and gives a first interpretation as the slogan meaning that we should not always be constantly shifting our focus to something new. Once we've made up our mind to do something, we must stick to that course of action until we've reached our goal. Again, I'm not sure how that relates to the translation of the slogan. The second aspect of it, he gives three different possible interpretations. Another traditional interpretation of this slogan advises us not to be too accepting of our own shortcomings or too tolerant of what is harmful. Normally, we don't know what to tolerate and what to condemn, enduring all kinds of unpleasant experiences without complaint. And taking adversity as the path kind of invites us to do that. This slogan points out that relying on and becoming too comfortable with such unwholesome mental states, whirls you around over and over again, will have an insidious and corroding effect on our character, and that we must do everything in our power to avoid being duped in this way. What does he mean? Not to be too accepting of our own shortcomings. I mean, we're teaching ourselves to be compassionate with ourselves when we see things arising in us that we find disagreeable or we want to get rid of, that we're saying, I accept that they are here. And where I'm going with this is he's saying, you may accept that they are there, and you may not beat yourself up over the fact that things arise because of causes and conditions, but that doesn't mean you have to act on them. You can change what you, how you choose to deal with that once it has arisen. And then he goes into the third interpretation, which to me begins to really get into the real, well, I'm only speaking for myself. This is where it starts to make sense to me. Another interpretation of this slogan refers to the many forms of ill will we are prone to. Because we often mistake our selfish thoughts and motivations for our allies, we need to be clear that just because someone has a friendly appearance does not necessarily mean that they're trustworthy. So he shifted from self to other here, rather without thought. We have to exercise caution with our emotional responses, learning not only to recognize destructive and insidious responses in ourselves, such as resentment, vengeance, and anger, but allowing ourselves to be repelled by the seductions that they invite. Even if they seem at first to provide us with protective armor, they will only lead to our downfall, making us more vulnerable than ever. He gives a poem by Aryadeva. Desire is no friend, but seems like one. Oh, isn't that a wonderful thing? I'd love to have that. If I had that, I would really make me happy. Desire is no friend, but it seems like one, which is why you do not fear it. But shouldn't people particularly rid themselves of a harmful friend? Mind training practice is not about simply learning how to be accommodating. Sometimes people get the idea that only our samsaric mind rejects things and that our problems would be solved if we could learn to be more open and responsive. Is that not so? Have we not been talking about that very much? We're not pushing away, we're being accepting. But we're being accepting so we can get to know ourselves. To study in this Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. Here comes Dogen putting in his 2 cents worth again. The emphasis here is on skillful means, not simply working with every situation in an accepting way. Whether we tolerate a situation or not isn't the problem. It's whether we can recognize what is beneficial for us and what is going to be harmful. If we examine ourselves more closely, we may find that blindly showing good-naturedness is one of our most problematic impulses. That gets into the idea of being nice is not always being kind. That may be true in our dealings with others, where we need to be firm and clear. And it may also be true in our dealings with ourselves, where we may also need to be firm and clear about certain kinds of things. That does not mean we're not being compassionate, but it may mean we're not pleasing others or ourselves in certain kinds of ways. Am I making sense here? If I am at all, please nod. If you're totally, yeah, a little bit anyway. No, says he. Okay. So then we turn to B. Alan Wallace. And he goes directly to it. The way he translates the slogan is, do not indulge in self-righteousness. Which is, really very, very clear. And speaks to relationship more than it speaks to what is arising within us. And both of those are, so very important and ultimately end up being the same anyway. But self-righteousness, I was so glad that he honed in on that because it can be such a bugaboo. When we detect inappropriate behavior on the part of others, he says, we may experience a knee-jerk reaction of flaring up in righteous indignation and resentment. Is that not true? Yes, it is true. In fact, there's a bumper sticker. I may have mentioned it before. If you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. You should be furious. You should be angry. You should be nearly exploding at seeing this horrible thing happening in the world. And if you're not outraged, you're just not paying attention to things. So it invites us to be angry. And the thing about righteous indignation is, the message there is, not only is it okay to be angry, but you should be. So he goes on here. But this aphorism encourages us to attend closely to the circumstances under which others' vices emerge, and the influences have led to our own virtues, such as they may be, he says. When you witness behavior that you think is wrong, put the righteous indignation on hold and consider that person's circumstances and history. Then consider your own history, particularly related to the Dharma, and consider that whatever virtue you have cultivated has been cultivated in dependence on the kindness, guidance, and inspiration of others. So he's saying, when you're in that situation and you feel the righteous indignation arise, don't forget the four mind turnings. Don't forget about cause and effect. Don't forget about suffering in the world. Don't forget about the impermanent nature of the things you may perceive as your own virtues. And, be aware, this is a rare and precious human life we have. How do we want to respond? A sense of gratitude takes the wind out of the sails of self-righteousness. Instead of standing in judgment, consider what circumstances might have given rise to bad behavior and cultivate the beneficial attitude of seeking to help that person. Gee, it sounds awfully like he's talking about the exchange of self and others, doesn't it? He's really kind of talking about Tonglen on the hoof. You're seeing the suffering of the other person, you're acknowledging it. How do you put it? Consider the circumstances that might have given rise to this. And then cultivate the desire, the beneficial desire, to help that person. I see you're suffering. How can I help you not suffer? And that shift from what an incredible jerk this person is, and I can't believe that he's been elected to fill in the blank, to, oh, there's a reason why this person is the way they are. What would it be like to live in that person's head? A person that you're looking at who you see as being, pick your favorite thing, pompous, arrogant, opinionated, crass, hateful, bigoted, whatever it might be. What would it be like to live in that head? Whew. And to recognize this person is suffering deeply. They might not say that if you ask them, but they are. So when the self-judgment, when the self-righteous indignation arises, that is one of those things that looks like a friend and is not. It's one that, lots of people like to just get in and wallow in it. It looks like an old friend. Oh, yeah, And when we're playing the game, ain't it awful? Ain't it awful that they did this? Oh, yeah, and ain't it awful when that's often plays a part of it, and it's not our friend, that arises, and it is takes us away from. There's so many of the basics here. It's an adversity. When self-righteous indignation arises, that is adversity arising. It's our own suffering arising. So rather than giving into it, don't be so predictable. Rather than giving into it, take it as the path in the way of transformation. Keeping these pledges, and I think he defines the whole sixth point as a series of pledges. This one's not to indulge in self-righteousness. Helps us check the relationship between our deepest motivation and our behavior. We checked our aspiration earlier this evening. Does our behavior always reflect our aspiration? No. If only it was true. So often, we catch ourselves. Oh, geez, I said things I wished I hadn't said, or I didn't say something I wished I had said, or I found myself all wadded up and I couldn't let go of it, So our behavior is not really always reflecting our aspiration. In a way, that's why we have an aspiration, If we didn't have those kinds of things arise, we wouldn't even need an aspiration. So, but he's pointing out, this helps us keep our behavior more in keeping with our aspiration, less likely to go off the rails in certain ways. The need to periodically check motivation. How do I want to be? What's my motive here? Is exemplified by stories of enlightenment enthusiasts who make some progress in meditation, only to be disappointed to discover that a good 20-minute meditation produces a high that quickly wears off. Why meditate, he says, when you can more easily get a temporary high by taking a pill or smoking a joint? The goal of Dharma is not a temporary high, but a lasting state of well-being, realized by tapping into our own primordial wisdom. It's the motivation that links behavior to this. It is motivation that links behavior to this deep transformation, far beyond temporary state effects of meditation. We've talked about this before, but he says Dharma practice transforms the patterns of thought that percolate through our minds day after day, producing progressively more stable results. Gradually, these shifts manifest in more benevolent ways of responding to adversity, pain, loss, frustration, and disappointment. Gradually, adversity doesn't dominate us. We discover more inner strength, more inner ballast, to make our way through all times, good and bad. So he kind of once again touches on this aspect of the transformative process. That when something arises in us, the adversity arises in us, and that's the only place the adversity is going to arise is in our minds. And it might be righteous indignation, it might be jealousy or envy, it might be overexcitement about something that we desperately want. It could be any number of things. That when it arises, what we do with it will affect how it arises the next time. It's there for a bit in our conscious awareness, and after it's gone, it's down in the storehouse consciousness, but it's not just lying there limp, These things that we set in motion continue to work underneath our awareness, and when these things arise again, they're affected by how we managed it the last time. So each time it's transformed a bit. If the next time righteous indignation arises, if we say, "Oh, there's righteous indignation. You know what? I think I will remember to look at the causes and conditions behind this person that is just driving me nuts right now. Why are the way they are? What's going on here? Is there a bit of compassion I can develop here?" And eventually that goes away. When it comes up again, that righteous indignation is much easier to once again go into that mode. And eventually it becomes just the way we do things. So I think sometimes the "don't be so predictable" might be referring to our habit energy. Don't allow habit energy to decide what you're going to do for you. Don't be so predictable. You might have to step in. You might have to be firm. What was the other way they translated that? But you get the idea. We might have to be firm with ourselves in that regard. I'm not going to respond in the old patterned ways. I'm not going to be so predictable. So I will end there and stop the recording. Just for the record, it is the 7th of September.